had been seeing quilts made entirely of flying geese all over Instagram. I figured out how to make one, and I'm showing you how you can make one too. This pattern is completely beginner friendly, and I made it entirely out of fat quarters. If you're like me and trying to spend less on fabric this year, save this for later and just use fat quarters from your stash. I used the Fast 4 flying geese method throughout this entire quilt, and each of the flying geese are 3 inches by 6 inches. So I will show you how to cut your fat quarters, and from each fat quarters, you should get enough pieces to make 2 flying geese, and then you just kind of mix and match the fat quarters as you wish. Here I have my fat quarter laid out. I'm going to square up the edge. I have the long edge on the left here, and then the shorter edge on the bottom. So the top to bottom should be about 21 inches, and from left to right is around 18. Again, I'm just squaring off the one edge, so I have a nice square corner to cut off of. And ignore how I just cut that. I should have gone to the other side of the table, but I didn't. So for each flying geese set, you need 1 large square that's 7.5 inches and 4 smaller 4.25 inch squares. And like I mentioned, we're going to get 2 sets out of each fat quarter. So first, I go ahead and cut a strip that is 7.5 inches long. I don't have a long ruler that is wide enough for 7.5 inches. So what I do is I take my 6-inch one and then a smaller one and add 1.5 inches to it. Do it however you want. Just make sure you cut a long strip that is 7.5 inches wide. Now we're going to cut 2 more strips. These will each be 4.25 inch. And from each 4.25 inch strip, you're going to get 4 4.25 inch squares for a total of 8 4.25 inch squares. This piece on the right is scrap. Go ahead and set it aside. So I take these 2 4.25 inch strips and I actually place them on top of each other to speed up the cutting. And I will be making 4 4.25 inch square cuts here for, again, a total of 8 4.25 inch squares. We'll have a little bit of scrap left here. You can either set that aside or cut some more 4.25 inch squares and try to do the math to add some more flying geese and maximize your fat quarters. I just scrapped mine and we'll use it for another project. Then bring back your 7.5 inch strip and cut 2 7.5 inch squares, and you will have this square of scrap from that. It's not quite large enough to get another 7.5 inch square. So again, you can try to use it for like 4.25 inch squares or just save it for another project. So here are your 3 scrap pieces, and then you should be left with 8 4.25 inch squares and 2 7.5 inch squares. So 2 sets of cuts that will make Fast 4 flying geese. So 4 flying geese or 8 flying geese total from the whole fat quarter. I just mix and match. We will call one of these sets of 4 flying geese 1 block. So I ended up cutting up 25 fat quarters this way for a total of 50 of these blocks or 200 flying geese. You could totally play around with this for how many fat quarters you want to use. So let me know your questions and make sure to like and follow. For part 2, we will go over the Fast 4 flying geese method, how to use up those pieces we just cut. This is part 2 on how to make this flying geese quilt. My previous video, I showed how to cut up all of the fat quarters, in which you should have ended up with the 7.5 inch squares and these 4.25 inch squares. Now we're going to use these to make flying geese with the Fast 4 flying geese method. I love this method because it is 0 waste, and like the name of the method, it is fast. Cut up 25 fat quarters will give me a total of 200 flying geese in the end, and I'm using this 4 at a time method, and I'm mixing and matching my different fabrics to make this an even more scrappy looking quilt. You could even use different 4.25 inch squares. What you're going to do is take the larger 7.5 inch square and place it right side facing up, and 2 of the 4.25 inch squares and place them right sides facing down on opposite corners like this. Then you want to draw a diagonal line from the top to the bottom and then sew a 1/4 inch on both sides of that diagonal line. Once you've stitched those 2 lines, you'll want to go ahead and cut this right in half along the original marked line down the center. Now you will have 2 pieces that look like this, and you will want to press them. I pressed mine towards the 2 smaller triangles or the darker fabric here. Once they are pressed, take the 2 remaining triangles and place them in the upper corner, and do this with both pieces, and we are going to repeat the same process where we sew a 1/4 inch on each side of that marked line going down the middle. I used a Hera marker to mark all my smaller 4.25 inch squares, but you could use a regular fabric marker or pen. And once we have sewn lines on both sides, we go ahead and cut down the middle again, and this should give us our 4 flying geese. I again pressed towards the darker fabric or the outside triangle there. Then once I have all 4 of these pressed, I kept repeating the same process over and over with all of my pieces until I had 200 flying geese like this, and then I trimmed them all down. But I will show you how to trim these right now, and I love using this ruler by Creative Grids. It makes trimming flying geese so easy. This is not like sponsored in any way. I just genuinely love this tool. If you want to give me a little extra support though, check out my Amazon storefront and I have it listed there. All of these flying geese should end up at the 3 by 6 inch size. So I find those marks on this ruler and then line it up with my flying geese in that middle triangle there, and then trim the first 2 sides. And then you just flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. Like I mentioned, I cut up a total of 25 fat quarters to make this throw sides, but you could do as many as you want. Make sure to save this post for later and give me a follow, and I will show you how I put these together in my next video. If you're looking for a beginner friendly and free quilt pattern, this one's for you. Save it for later. This is part 3 of how to make this flying geese quilt. I made this entirely from fat quarters, so it is a great stash buster. In the previous 2 parts, we cut all our pieces and then put together our flying geese with the fast 4 flying geese method. For my quilt specifically, I am making a throw size out of 25 fat quarters and 200 flying geese. Of those 200 flying geese, I have 50 sets of 4 that all match. And what I did was I made blocks of 4 flying geese that are coordinating. You can mix and match and just completely make them random throughout your quilt. You can do this however you want. I'm just showing you how I did mine. Attached all of my flying geese by placing them right sides together and then sewing along the long edge. You'll want to make sure that the flying geese are going in the same direction for each of the blocks, and then I just went through and chain pieced a bunch of pairs together like this, and then I put the pairs together after getting them all in sets of 2. I'm just showing this one right now though. So you'll see here I have these 2 sets of 2, and then I'm going to put these together by placing them right sides together and again sewing along the long edge of the single flying geese here. So this is what one of those blocks look like, and then I pressed them all in the same direction. So I'm pressing up towards the point or the center point of the flying geese, and I pressed every single one of my sets of 4 in this way because I'm going to be nesting the seams. Because the way I put my final quilt together is I had these points going in opposite directions. If you want to do a different layout of your quilt, just make sure you consider that when you're pressing your seams. If all of the points were going in the same direction from row to row, you're not going to want to press them in the same direction because that would create an awfully bulky seam. Then once I had a bunch of these sets of 4, I started putting them together like this. So you'll see the points on the left are going up and the points on the right are going down. Then I pressed this long seam in the back open, and I kept repeating this until I had 25 blocks that looked like this. Basically 25 blocks of 8 flying geese each, or 25 blocks of 2 sets of 4, whatever. They all look like this. And at this point, I decided to start laying them out because since I'm making kind of a scrappy quilt, I didn't want too much of the same pattern in one spot of the quilt. And what I ended up making is a 5 by 5 block grid. There are 5 blocks across and 5 blocks down, or 5 rows of 5. And then I just started putting these together. You should be able to continue nesting seams between blocks since we pressed in the same direction for all of the pieces and they're going in opposite directions. And what I did is I put together row 1, then 2, 3, and 4 by placing the blocks right sides together and sewing along the long edge. And then once I had all of the individual rows put together, I then just attached all of the rows and I had my finished quilt top. Let me know what questions you have, and if you make this quilt, I would love to hear from you. Send me a message with a picture on Instagram. I love to see those, and happy quilting.